evening. We'll go ahead and get started, and I trust that others will be coming in. I see some others outside. You should have a set of notes entitled Counseling with Teenagers. We started that last week, got to the middle of page 2. So I think we'll finish up the teenagers tonight, and then I'll pass out the outline for depression and suicide. So I anticipate that next Wednesday should be our last session. We should be able to wrap things up, and any final comments or questions. What I'm going to do tonight is we're going to start off by, I'm going to respond to a couple of questions that were sent to me, and then we'll continue our lesson on teenagers, and then there are 2 or 3 questions that were sent to me based on that too. So keep the questions coming, and then trust that all the information here has been helpful. Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer tonight. Thank you, Father, for our time together. Thank you for your watch care over us and for your protection of us. And we just count on the privilege to be here this evening. We ask that as we continue our course on basics of counseling, that you will again teach us some things that will help us as we seek to effectively minister to those in need. Thank you for each one who is here. Thank you for those who are viewing this class online. And just thank you for the opportunity to share and discuss matters that will be helpful to us as we serve one another and serve those around us in our communities, in our neighborhoods. We praise you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, the first question I'm going to deal with tonight, or seek to answer, is a general question. It goes back to just basic counseling or general counseling. And so, when counseling someone, is it best to be yourself and speak as you normally would, even if it is perceived initially as harsh? Okay. When counseling someone, is it best to be yourself and speak as you normally would, even if it is perceived initially as harsh? Or is it necessary to be who you are not and speak as they think you ought? Okay, so I had to think about that one twice. I always encourage folks to be yourself, and I've mentioned that several times in our class thus far. Don't be someone that you are not. And there are many, many theories of counseling that are floating around out there, and a lot of those theories of counseling and approaches to counseling are really tied to a therapist or counselor's personality. And there are approaches that just don't fit. So my word of encouragement is just be yourself. And if you counsel someone and that you pick up through body language or facial expressions that the person feels threatened or intimidated or somewhat turned off by the approach, bring that up as a counseling issue. And you can start out by saying something like, I kind of sense that how I say things or what I'm talking about here is making you uncomfortable. And use that as an opportunity because that's part of the rapport building. So if you pick up some resistance or some negativity, go ahead and deal with that. Because a person may perceive you as being harsh, but you're not being harsh, you're just being yourself. And so to put the other person at ease, you can share with them that, hey, give me a chance, just let's go along, and if you feel like I'm being harsh, bring it to my attention, and we can discuss that. So counseling is a matter of, many times, of getting 2 different personalities to fit, okay? And so there are times when you aren't going to be a good fit for someone, but there are times when even people who have different personalities and approaches to discussing, they will fit. They will be able to overlook the styles and just get be more focused on the counseling process. So my recommendation is when counseling someone, it is best to be yourself and speak as you normally would, even if it's perceived initially as harsh. And use that, use the counseling situation, the counseling process to deal with that issue, okay? All right, the next question. Any thoughts about that? Any questions? Okay. Last week you mentioned that if someone is showing signs of a thought disorder, you would recommend not praying with them. Could you give us more information about thought disorders, how to recognize them, what causes them? And the second question was, are psychotic people dangerous? Okay. Could you give us more information about thought disorders, how to recognize them, what causes them, and are psychotic people dangerous? Okay, a thought disorder is basically a disorganization in one's thinking. It's disorganization in one's thinking, and that leads to or contributes to abnormal way of expressing themselves, either in written form or speaking primarily. And thought disturbance, when someone mentions thought disorder, thought disturbance, one of the first things that comes to mind is schizophrenia, because thought disturbance, thought disorder is associated highly with schizophrenia. And by the way, schizophrenia is, a lot of people when asked them, what do you think schizophrenia is? They say split personality, because it comes from two Greek words, to split in a person, a split personality. But schizophrenia is not split personality, okay? Schizophrenia is basically a break from reality. And so you have several key symptoms or signs. One is hallucinations. Hallucinations may be visual hallucinations. It could be auditory hallucinations. It could be tactile hallucinations or olfactory. So an example, I had a 16-year-old boy in Waianae many, many years ago, when I was called to the home in a crisis situation. He would say, "Mr. Doberman, get all these roaches away from my house. They're crawling up the wall, they're crawling all over me. I can't stand it." Okay? So he was having a visual hallucination, seeing something because there was no roaches at all. All right? But he was also feeling it, crawling all over him. So one of the signs of schizophrenia is hallucinations. Another thing is delusions. Delusions is a false belief that has no fact behind it or basis for believing that way. And the most common one is that people think that the police have put up all these cameras, FBI put up cameras in their homes and feel that they're spying on them. And as I mentioned, I had clients, sometimes they would come into my office, they're looking around, so what are you looking at? I'm looking for, I said, cameras, because I thought that maybe the government is spying on me. Okay, so you have hallucinations, which could take different forms. You have delusions, which are false beliefs, but you also have thought disturbance. And that's the third major characteristic of schizophrenia. Thought disturbances are one of the most difficult behaviors, for lack of a better term, to diagnose. Okay? Because there are a lot of things that could cause thought disturbance. How many of you have ever gotten up, you were taking a nap or sleeping, and you were sound asleep, you were really dreaming, and then somebody got you up. And then you started talking, and they said, "What did you say? You didn't make any sense." Okay? That's a thought disturbance, all right? And if you've experienced that, and someone has told you it doesn't make sense, you're not schizophrenic, okay? So don't worry about that. You're not having a psychotic episode, because one of the causes of thought disturbance is tiredness, fatigue, and sometimes people have thought disorders because it's drug-induced. They're using illegal substances, but tiredness is a major cause of thought disturbances. And when you look at thought disturbances, about 30, 40 years ago, we looked at maybe 4 or 5. And now the experts have come up with 20 different subtypes of thought disturbances. I'm just going to share a few with you in response to that question. And remember that a thought disturbance is basically an incoherent way of organizing thoughts, and it comes out in disorganized speech and writing many times. So it affects basically one's ability to communicate clearly to other people. So one form of thought disorder, and by the way, as I share these, please do not diagnose yourself, okay, and say that I've experienced this, all right? So that's a warning here. But one is blocking. One is blocking. A person may be going along in a conversation, and all of a sudden will stop. And it could be stopping for a few seconds or a few minutes, okay? And then when that person continues the conversation, he's talking about a totally different subject than when he began. Okay, so blocking is you're going along, he stops for seconds or several minutes, and then they continue, but they could change the topic of conversation. That's a common thought disturbance in schizophrenia. Another one is circumstantiality. Circumstantiality, and mental health professionals deal with this one a lot. A person could be talking about a subject, and then they'll go off into details about other things, you know, really along with the person, and they come back to it. So for example, if a counselor says, oh, you're wearing a nice dress today, okay? The person might be saying, yeah, I got this dress at so-and-so. Then they'll start talking about the materials from which, you know, the dress is made, the colors, how it coordinates with other things. They'll say, oh yeah, this dress was made in Bangladesh. And so let me tell you about Bangladesh and some things about the industries over there and the people. And they'll go on and just talk about those things. Then we'll come back, oh yeah, thanks for noticing the dress that I'm wearing. Okay, so they're going all around, and they have all these excessive details. That's really unnecessary. Okay, so that's another one. Another one is derailment. Okay, derailment. So a person just moves from subject to subject. So you've asked them, what did you have for breakfast this morning? Say, well, I had some toast and some coffee and a couple of scrambled eggs. Okay. Then we'll start talking about, oh, what you're wearing. And even though you asked the question about what you're wearing, and then they say, oh, did you notice that, you know, the car in the parking lot this morning? So they'll be distracted. Something's going on in their brain, and so they move from subject to subject. So you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, what are they talking about and what's happening here? So you become confused, okay, because they are incoherent. Another one is distractible speech. Distractible speech. So a person will be, you ask them, where did you go on vacation last week? And they'll talk about the vacation, but all of a sudden, right in the middle of talking about the vacation, they'll go on to a different subject. Oh, by the way, I had a really good cup of coffee this morning. And they'll talk about that, and then they'll go back to talking about that. And then another one is what they call echolalia. Okay, so if I ask a person, how are you doing today? The person will say, how are you doing today? Did you sleep well last night? Did you sleep well last night? Okay, so they're repeating the question that I'm asking. Okay, many years ago in Indiana, I had this fellow who had been institutionalized. He was in Evansville State Hospital from his 20s. He was in his mid-50s, and the 70s was a time when the state hospitals nationwide were emptying out all the hospitals and putting them back in the community. And this was in response to the Community Mental Health Centers Act signed by President Kennedy in 1963. So they were funding a lot of these community mental health centers, emptying the state hospitals, throwing them back in the community. Well, the community I was in, we didn't have anything. I didn't have a day treatment program, nothing to have these people. So they sent this guy who had been in the hospital from his 20s to his 50s back home to live with his elderly mother. Okay? And so he would come in, and I would say, you know, how are you doing today? And he'd say, how are you doing today? Pretty fair, pretty fair. Okay? And so What time did you go to bed last night? Oh, what time did you go to bed last night? Pretty fair, pretty fair. Okay? And that's what he would, and then once in a while he'll make faces like he was angry at me or whatever, and my thought was that he was hallucinating. Okay? And so we had to put him back in the hospital because his mom came in crying one time, says he stays up all night, he's pacing back and forth, and sometimes he gets really aggressive. And that's because he felt uncomfortable being in the home where he had less structure than being in the hospital for 30-something years. So he had become institutionalized. But that's an example of echolalia, where he just repeats the things that I mentioned to him. Okay. One of the things about thought disorders is that they really don't know after all these years what causes it. Some think it's genetics or hereditary, environmental, or biological, but they're not really sure about that. You see a lot of thought disorders in schizophrenia and psychosis, but you also see a lot of thought disturbance in depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety. Now the question is, why depression and anxiety? Is there a lot of thought disorder? Well, what is one of the characteristics of depression? One of the symptoms is that a person doesn't sleep well and doesn't get rest and is exhausted. Same thing with anxiety. Anxiety keeps a person up, they don't get rest. So you remember what I mentioned earlier? You're more likely to have some kind of thought disturbance when you're tired. So depressed people, anxious people, you put together tiredness, and you also see that thought disturbance. Okay. Everyone here, everybody at one time or another has exhibited thought disturbance. Okay. But so don't worry about that. You start worrying about it if it goes on for a long time, and it interferes with your ability to function every day, and it interferes with your ability to go to work, or for kids and teenagers to do well in school. And yes, teenagers do experience thought disorders, and they also become psychotic. One of the ways we used to screen for thoughts, how many of you heard of the Rorschach ink blot test? Okay, it was developed by Herman Rorschach in 1921. It's called a projective test. And it has 10 cards, and you have basically like ink blots. Some are black or black and gray. Some have a little color, like maybe some orange and red. And so you show these cards, and the person tells you what they see. Okay. Now it's not as simple as you think, because there's a really extensive scoring. So when I was taking the course in assessment, we had 25 of us in the class. The professor on an exam would give us the responses for each of the 10 ink blots, and we had to score them and write up the interpretation. Every one of us had 25 different interpretations, well, 25 different ways of scoring it. But I remember when in my last semester I was working in the clinic, and I saw this young man in his early 20s, and I was administering the Rorschach test. So I showed him one card, and he said, "It looks like somebody blew his brains out." Okay. Now, when I finished, the professor said, "This guy has a thought disturbance." Okay, because most people would say, some other things. But he said, "Looks like somebody's brains got blown out." Okay, that's a pathological response. So there are different ways of detecting whether or not a thought disorder is present, and that's one of the ways. But if from time to time you say something and you get the feedback, you didn't make any sense, please do not be concerned. Okay, do not be concerned. Everybody has thought disturbance from time to time, and especially if you're tired. If you're tired, sometimes when you're preoccupied, you're anxious about something or depressed, that will also contribute to that. All right? Any questions? Okay, let's move on. Last week we started the section on counseling with teenagers. And one of the things I mentioned, emphasize, is that counseling with teenagers is really an exciting age. It's an exciting age to work with. Okay? And the takeaway from counseling with teenagers is to remember that teenagers are in this transition from childhood to adulthood, okay, childhood to adulthood. And so you're going to see some erratic behaviors, impulsive behaviors, well, even some adults show erratic behaviors and impulsive behaviors. But a teenager is trying to find his or her own way. And so sometimes they'll act like adults. Other times you think, oh, you're making progress, you're talking with them, and it could be your own son or daughter or whatever, but then they act like a little kid, and they throw tantrums. Okay? Well, that's to be expected in working with teenagers. But I mentioned last week, as we looked at page 1 of your handout, that he is a person in transition, his life patterns are crystallizing, he is a bundle of possibilities. He views life through the eyes of an idealist. And then number 5 on page 2, he is capable but short on experience. He has a rapidly maturing body and intellect. He responds to a challenge. Okay, so we looked at the first 7 of these, and as you go through these, I believe that they're self-explanatory. So as we go through these, I'll make some comments, but if you have any questions or comments that you would like to share, please do not hesitate to do so. Okay. If you work with teenagers, if it's your own child or someone, another family or family friends ask you to mentor them or to, sometimes, a lot of times, families who are having problems with their own sons or daughters will ask other people in hopes that those other folks can reach them. And it doesn't mean that if you get involved, they'll treat you differently, but you'd be surprised at times. Teenagers, they really crave talking to someone. When I worked with a DOE, I thought that being an old man, these teenagers wouldn't want to share anything with me, but I was pleasantly surprised that they really wanted to talk about stuff, really private stuff. And after developing the rapport, they shared. And a lot of times they would come back, even though a session wasn't scheduled, they would walk in because they were having problems. So teenagers crave that feedback from others, and they don't often have that. And when we look at number 8, a teenager wants to know. There is a thirst for knowledge on his part, and he's curious. He wants to find out things in his life and around him, and so he wants to explore, but he doesn't have a very good handle of how to go about it. So he's short on experience. And so this is a good time to provide concrete and really some specific advice and suggestions to kind of guide a teenager as to how to go about, whether it's problem solving, instead of punching out someone, okay, what are some other alternatives they can do, and then you encourage them to try it out in the coming week. So that's part of the process that you can use. So they want to know. They don't have it figured out. And remember, one of the things about teenagers is that oftentimes they're impulsive. They do things without thinking. Okay, something comes up, they react. And so part of the teenage years is to teach them social skills. And one of the key components of social skills is self-control. Self-control in relationships, removing the impulsivity as they deal with other people, as they react to different situations, especially situations that don't go their way. Those of you who have had teenagers, how many of you saw your teenagers as always on the go? They always have to do stuff, every activity. If the pandemic wasn't here and then we had all kinds of youth activities going on, they're here all the time. Okay, and if there's an activity at school, they're there. All right, and but teenagers, they crave activity. They're always on the go, always in motion, and so sometimes it may lead a teenager to reacting and doing things impulsively without thinking through the possible benefits as well as consequences. And so as a counselor, as one who counsels them and works with them, your role is to provide the guidance and the suggestions, not spoon feeding them, not giving them the answers, but just kind of asking questions that will make them think, get them to start thinking about what some of the possible courses of behavior are, and what are some of the possible benefits as well as consequences to each decision that they decide to follow. Okay, and number 10, he needs and is happiest when exercising self-control. Okay. He needs regulation. And many times what I've seen over the years is that sometimes some of the students who have come in to see me, they talk about spending time with their friends, and they spend more time with their friends and the friends' parents and family than with at their own home. Okay, why is that so? And I asked them, it seems like you're not home very much, and you're spending more time at your friend's home and doing things with the parents. I said, because it's calmer there. Okay, I know what to expect. They have rules, and it may surprise you, but teens, they crave rules. They crave those boundaries. They crave structure. I've had many students who, when school starts in the fall, they can hardly wait to get back. I said, how was the summer? Didn't you enjoy yourself? Yeah, but I want to be in school because when I'm in school, I have projects to work on, homework to do. The teachers are telling me what I need to do, and they need that structure. They need that structure, and it helps them to develop good self-control. So teenagers need regulation, and sometimes what they'll do is they'll find it through other people, other families, other than their own primary family. Okay, so something just to keep in mind. If someone else from another family, another teenager is spending a lot of time at your home, there's a good reason for that, possibly, that they see calmness, they see really a structured way of dealing with issues, dealing with problems, and getting along with each other. Okay. Number 11, and certainly this should be probably number 1, but he is the one who needs God. Okay. Like everyone else, he has an eternal soul, and there are teenagers who especially when you look at the problems that they face and the challenges that they face, they are looking for the answers in life. They realize that having all the material possessions doesn't bring happiness, doesn't satisfy them, and so they're more impressionable at this time towards the things of God. So our goal, as I mentioned before, is that to always look for and pray about opportunities to share Jesus Christ with them, okay? Especially if you know that they are not saved. It's a lot easier to do in a non-school setting. Okay? So as I mentioned before, the door is wide open. There are many, many opportunities. And I believe that if you pray for those opportunities, God will create those opportunities for us. Okay, go to page 3. Capturing the interests of teenagers. And you probably can add other things to this list as to what would be of interest to teenagers. And I mentioned here the key to unlocking the adolescent heart is interests. And we must not overlook the teenager's natural God-given interests. All attraction is based upon this phenomenon. And I have here a list of 12 different things that they are interested in. Fun, okay? Regardless of the activity, teenagers are looking for fun. And fun is the objective. And to some teens, it's serious business. Okay? They cannot function without doing something that's fun day in and day out. Friendships, oh, that's a major one. Friendships. Teens want to know how to make friends and keep friends, and their search for friends is never ending. And many times the friends that the so-called friends that they connect with could be because they are looking for something that they're not receiving elsewhere. And like I shared with you the example of the kid who wanted to belong to the Bloods, so he wore the red bandana. Then he got beaten up by the Crips. Okay? So he decided, I'm gonna not wear the blue, I'm the red, I'm gonna wear the blue. And then the Bloods were after him. Then there was a group back about 15 years ago, and they had black, and so he decided to go that, and then the Bloods and the Crips wanted to beat him up. By the way, there are gangs in school, you know, so don't think it's an adult thing. And so he decided to wear all three. Then all three groups wanted to beat him up. Okay, but he was looking for a sense of belonging, of acceptance by others. And so friendships are a priority for teens. The pressure for group acceptance is highest during the teenage years. Okay. Teenagers are also interested in parents. Okay, now don't fall over, but that's true. Okay, and it really, for reasons of self-interest I have here, it pays to get along with mom and dad. Okay, so after all, parents control the finances unless a teen is working part-time. And never underestimate the influence and the power of parents. Okay? Quite often, as you counsel with teenagers, it might be necessary, and it probably is going to be necessary, to also touch bases with the parents, because as you work with the teens, you'll find out a lot of information as to how they are getting along or not getting along with the parents, and this is a good opportunity to guide the parents as to how they can develop and maintain a very, very strong relationship with their son or their daughter. Education, number 4, education. I mentioned last week that usually with early teens, say a freshman and sophomore in high school, they're not interested in, they might not be interested in education. And certainly they're not interested in post-high school education or any training, because at that age, they tend to be more self-absorbed. And their primary focus is satisfying their own needs, and the here and now is what's important. So if you try to talk to them about, oh, what are you going to do after high school? They have no clue and they're not interested. Now, when you get to junior, senior year, then it changes. Okay, light bulb goes on, and they start talking about what's happening. And one of the reasons that teenagers may eventually talk about education is fear. Okay, is fear, because they want to know prior to graduating from high school what they are going to do. Okay? It's very, very fearful if they have no idea. They're a senior and they have no plans to, whether it's to go on to college, go on to the workforce, join the military, and that's very, very frightening. Okay? I'm just sharing that with you from experience working with them. Number 5, personality development. Okay, this is the teenage years are years in which a person is forming his lifelong ways of behaving, of thinking, of problem solving, of just looking and evaluating different situations. And he's going to ask questions like, how can I be popular? If you want to really get the conversation rolling with a teenager, just ask them, do you consider yourself a popular person? Okay. And I've used that many, many times. And especially with teens that don't say much, I'll say, do you consider, compared to your peers, do you consider yourself popular? And they say, no, I don't. I say, well, why not? Do you have any idea why not? And tell me about your relationships with others. Tell me about how your other peers look at you and how they respond to you. Do they consider what you say as being important, or do they just kind of ignore you most of the time? And then, if they say they're being ignored, then we can get into the behaviors. What are you doing or not doing that seems to turn off other people to you? Okay? So personality development is an important area that are of interest to teenagers at this time. Appearance and dress. Appearance and dress. For teens, more time is spent on grooming, making themselves look more attractive and appealing to others. Okay? Now you might look at your own son or daughter or remember, so no, that's not true. But for the most part, teens are interested in how they look. Okay? I had a student several years ago, and I would ask him, tell me about your day when it starts on a school day. I say, well, I get up at 4:30 every morning. So, wow, that's kind of early. What time do you leave the house to come to school? Well, about 7:15, so I can get there before 8 o'clock. And I said, well, what do you do between 4:30 and 7:15 when you leave the house? Well, I'll eat a quick breakfast, but I get up, I take a shower, and I have to pick out my clothes. Okay, so how long does it take you? About 30 minutes. And then what else? Well, then I have to comb my hair and brush my teeth. How long does it take you? Oh, about another 30 minutes. I said, wow, you take that long? I said, yeah. And I remember when he used to come in to see me, from time to time he would pull out his mirror in our session. He would look at himself, he's making sure his hair, because especially if it was a windy day, he would make sure he combed his hair. And I said, that's fine, we're still talking, but whether you believe it or not, teens are interested in how they look, in their grooming, okay, because it makes an impression, positive or negative, with others. Number 7, manners. Teenagers are entering a world in which they are expected to know what to do and when to do it. Okay? And they're beginning to become aware of the fact that there are rules that need to be followed in our society. Okay, the art of communication. That's another area of interest of teens. How to start and hold a conversation becomes a priority. And remember, early years, they become really self-absorbed, more interested in their own wishes and their wants and desires. But then eventually they have to learn that the world doesn't revolve around them, okay? That they have to cooperate and they have to learn how to deal with others. And as I mentioned before, one of the most common counseling goals that counselors in high school face is just teaching basic social skills. What to say, what not to say, when to say things, when not to say things, how to carry on a conversation without interrupting others, how to listen. Okay? We used to teach students how to listen, and they have difficulty. Well, adults have difficulty doing that too. So the art of communication. And then you have dating, military service, and marriage. Okay? Dating, military service, and marriage. You'd be surprised how many seniors I've had, they talk about, they're thinking about marriage right after high school. Okay, and then number 12, spiritual issues. You begin to see a greater and genuine interest in the Bible, salvation, eternity, and the application of God's word to everyday issues and problems of life. I think that during this pandemic, if you were to dig a lot more, you would find that teens and also adults are looking for answers. Okay? There are many people out there today, teens and adults, that are really feeling hopeless. They're feeling helpless. They feel like, is this what the rest of my life is going to be like with all these restrictions? And maybe, I believe many Christians feel that way too. So if you're feeling that way, knowing that you are a child of God, that your eternity is secure, imagine an adult, imagine a youngster who doesn't have Christ and is looking at the world, looks at the news and is wondering, is this what life is all about? Okay, and I was listening to a report just 2 or 3 days ago. I can't remember where it was, but they said that a quarter of young adults have contemplated suicide during this pandemic. Okay, you look at a quarter of young adults. So young adults can be late teens to say the 20s, but a quarter of young adults, I don't know if it was CDC had done studies, but a quarter of young adults have contemplated suicide during this pandemic. And I thought to myself, yeah, that might be a low number. It could be higher than that. Okay, it could be higher than that. And I remember when this pandemic started, I told my former co-worker at the high school, I said, if this pandemic continues, you and the counselors at the school are going to be really, really busy. You're going to be really, really busy because you're going to have a lot of kids coming to you who are really feeling like this is it. This is the end of the world. There's nothing to look forward to. And sure enough, as I touch bases with this person, I'm told that that's exactly what's happening. Okay? Even when they have to do counseling virtually, she's been very, very busy. Teens need somebody to talk to. Okay, let's go to page 4. Page 4. A general guide for counseling teenagers. A general guide for counseling teenagers. Working with teenagers is like working with adults. Okay? What you need to do is focus on establishing rapport. Okay? You do what you can, you do your best to establish rapport and develop that relationship. And it may not happen right away. Okay? It might take some time if you're called to mentor a youngster, a teenager. It's going to take some time. Don't feel like after 1 or 2 meetings they're going to trust you completely. It takes a while. But you work to gain their confidence. You do that by showing interest, understanding, and sympathetic. Do away with all the errors. Remember, we're talking about the errors to avoid, the attitudes to change. This is where you examine yourself. Okay, what are some attitudes I need to get rid of? What are some of the errors I need to avoid as I'm talking with them? When I first started my first job in Indiana, I remember I had a child welfare services in this town I was in, referred a family, husband, wife, and a girl who had been physically abused and sexually abused, not by the parents, but some outside relatives and some other teenagers. She was about 15 years old. And so they came in as, for family therapy. And so what I did was, in addition to meeting with all 3 of them, I spent individual time with a couple, with the husband and wife. Sometimes I'd see the husband by himself, the wife by herself, and the girl by herself. Okay. And husband was kind of a good sized guy, muscular, but he had these mean looking eyes. Okay. And the mother was huge. Okay. And whenever they came in, mom would do all the talking. Husband didn't say very much. Yeah, once in a while I see he'd have a bruise on his head. And then when I talked to the girl for 3 months, she was really guarded in what she said. And I would ask her questions, we talked, and I just never felt that there was a good rapport established. Okay. And then mom would say once in a while, yeah, my husband has a really bad temper, so sometimes he pushes me around. And when you look at him, yeah, I could say, yeah, he has a mean looking, I wouldn't want to face him by himself in the middle of the night. And, but he wouldn't say very much, okay? And then, but once in a while I come in with a bruise. So after 3 months, the girl finally said, Mr. Doman, what my parents have been telling you is not true, it's all a lie, okay? It's my mother who's beating up my father, okay? And she's threatening him. She threatened him to beat him up even more if he told me, okay? So I pulled him aside and says, level with me, is your wife beating you up? Is that how you got the bruises and the cuts? He said, You know, she has a temper and she throws things and she hits me and this and that. I said, okay. So I decided to confront her. Okay. And she comes in and I tell her this, that, you know, you're beating up your husband. And she goes, oh, I'm having a heart attack, you know. And I thought, wow, what a big show, okay? But I was laughing inside too, because I said, oh, you know, that's not true, I'm having a heart attack. And so I told my secretary, you know, we didn't have 911, I says, you know, call the hospital, or call the sheriff, or you know, tell them we need an ambulance. I said, no, I'll be fine, okay? But see, it took me 3 months before the girl trusted me to tell me exactly what was happening. Okay, so I was able to finally confront the mother and said, if you continue this, okay, I'm going to tell your husband to call the police. And not only do you risk being arrested, but you risk Child Welfare Services who refer you taking your daughter away from you, okay, because it's an unsafe home. So that really changed things, but it took a while before this girl felt comfortable enough to tell me what was really happening in the home. So I'm sharing this in that when you work with anyone, you have to be patient. Be patient. Don't expect rapport building to occur in a short time and that you're going to get all the facts, all the information. Okay, it takes time. So it takes a lot of patience as well. Okay, so you work on gaining their confidence. Teenagers are going to be feeling you out. They want to see if we can trust you, if I can trust you. Okay. Help teens identify their problems from their own point of view. Okay. So often as adults, we want to share with them how we see their problems as developing. Okay. So they're down here, we're up here. So we're trying to convince them, this is the way you should look at your problems because this is how we as adults look at the problem. So to kind of get down to the level and try to help the teens identify the problems from their own point of view. Try to, you know, put yourself in your shoes. That's what I mentioned here. Put yourself in their shoes. It helps to try and recall what it was like for you when you were a teenager. Okay. Number 3, realize that there is a problem to be solved and not a sermon to be preached. Okay. I think that all of us as adults, it's so easy to preach to our sons and daughters and to other teens who come our way. But doing so could only serve to destroy the relationship between you and them. Okay, so teens need acceptance and understanding. Number 4, avoid giving too much advice until you have drawn the teen out sufficiently to understand the problem and its setting. A young person who is wisely guided can be led to arrive at his own answers to his problems. Okay, so again, you're applying what we have learned under the basics, in the basics of counseling, encouraging them to talk, raising questions that reflect what is said, avoiding the tendency to spoon feed, okay, spoon feed answers, pointing out we're having a discussion about possible courses of action, rather than telling them, this is what you need to do, to say, what do you think could be done to address this situation? And see what, and you kind of prod and you just kind of lead them along to consider various options. And then with each of those options, now what are some of the positive things that may occur? What are some of the negative consequences? Okay. Focus on things that are of immediate concern to him or her. Listening and letting the teenager dominate the question, dominate the conversation. Yeah, here are 3 questions that were sent to me by email. Number 1, even if we've established rapport, teens frequently go through their moods and don't want to talk. They'll answer with just one word, okay, yes, no, and sometimes won't even answer. If they are angry or rebellious, do we just leave them alone? If it's been a while, how do we try to make a connection? Okay. Tough one, that's a tough question. Okay. One of the things I try to do is, if a teenager or an adult becomes really emotional, whether they're really sad, they're crying, or they're angry and rebellious, a lot of times I'll just move towards ending the session. Okay, because if you try to talk to them, anybody, when they're upset, you're not going to get very far. Okay, and sometimes it's okay. Many times it's okay to just say, hey, I think we just need to break for today and just kind of wrap things up. But I think that there are some things to, to think about, and you can kind of go over that. I try to ask open-ended questions as much as possible, rather than questions that will give me a single answer. How are you today? Oh, fine. Did you go to bed early last night? Yes or no. Okay. I might ask them, and try anyway. They might still give you a 1 or 2 word answer, but how's your day going? Tell me about your day. Tell me about your day. Tell me about any good things that have happened in your life today. So that might be a way to get around that. But there are times when it's best if you just leave them alone, and it's going to be times when you're going to feel like you're not making any headway because you're not making a connection, and that's okay. Number 2, with distance learning, how do we encourage teens to do their assignments? They can sleep until noon or later if there is no supervision, and to do more with the minimum. If they are not understanding material, how do they get help or ask questions if they are interacting with the computer? Frequently, teens don't ask questions. Who monitors if they are understanding the material? Okay. I would say that's with this distance learning, it's a challenge that teachers face. Okay, teachers face. My next door neighbor is an elementary school teacher, and she was telling me that when they went to virtual learning at the end of March, immediately when she went on the computer, she can tell right away from the students' responses what parents were helping them, what parents were not helping them, what parents were making them memorize things to spew back to the teacher, and so she could do that. But she was telling me it's very, very difficult to monitor behavior when they're not there sitting next to the child. Okay. Right now, I don't know if you've heard that they've done a survey or research that a high percentage of teens, when we had the first lockdown, a high percentage of teens didn't even log in. Okay, they didn't even log in. One of my students who graduated, he called me and I said, how are you doing with the computer? So I went to, they gave a computer, so I went to pick up a laptop at school. Have you logged into your classes? No. Have you connected with your counselor, your specialist? No, I don't want to talk to him. So what if they contact you? I just ignore it, don't connect, okay? And I don't know what the answer is. There are times when you can't do anything. Distance learning creates more problems, or has created more problems, and teachers can do their best, but they still fall short in monitoring the behavior. This is where I believe parents have a lot of responsibility. They have a lot of, they can have a lot of influence in helping the teens, but as you know, a lot of parents are busy today, so they don't do that. But to this question, yeah, I don't see any clear answer to that if they don't interact, or they're interacting with computers, and they don't want to ask questions. Who monitors? I really don't know. That's a tough one. Number 3. So if you have any other suggestions, pass them along. If teens are being bullied at school and are more comfortable being at home, how do we help them make friends? Being at home makes it easier for them to be isolated and experience loneliness. Okay. First response, if teens are being bullied at school and you know about it, you need to do what you can to try to eliminate the bullying behavior. Okay. Because if teens are bullied and people know about it and nothing's being done, you're going to see other problems down the road. Okay? You're going to see teens who are depressed, who are suicidal. I've seen that happen. Okay? Where I worked at, it was nice, I shared with you, the counselors would go on the social media and they would see who is bullying other kids, and they would pull them in. They would pull them in and really give us stern talking and said, you know, we're gonna check social media. And so we better not have you do that, or you know, be bullying, harassing other kids, because you're gonna be seeing our vice principals, and they're gonna lower the boom on you. Okay, so if you know that teens are being bullied at school, and they're not more comfortable at home, they just found that staying at home is an easy way to get around the bullying. You know, encourage the parents, let the parents know, encourage the parent or encourage the student to go and see someone at the school to nip this in the bud, because and you can explain that continued bullying is just going to result in more mental health problems and issues down the road. Okay. All right. Number 5. Any questions? Any? Okay. We'll keep on going here. Yeah, we'll finish the teenagers tonight. We'll go on to the next one. Number 5, since teenagers want to be recognized as adults, respect their maturity. Take seriously what they say and how they feel. Look at teenagers as young men and young women. Okay? And we show that we respect their maturity and where they're at by the comments that they make. You know, if we make comments like, oh, you know what, that's not an important thing, or you shouldn't be thinking that way, you should be feeling that way, you know, or it's a minor problem, that's conveying the message that to you, you're not interested, it's not important. Okay? Because to that teenager, it is a major thing. It is a life-changing event. Okay? So they want to be recognized as adults, respect their maturity. Number 6, challenge the teenager. Help him to consider not only his full potential, including doing all that he can for God. Challenge a teenager. Encourage them. I've told teenagers in school is that one of the things I don't want you to be is mediocre. Okay? Don't be a mediocre student. Don't be a mediocre son or daughter in your family. Let's look at your skills. Let's look at your strengths and what can, give me some ideas how you can use your strengths to better yourself and to make progress in your life. Okay. Help the teenager to accept himself, as one who possesses both strengths and weaknesses. Help a teenager to develop a realistic picture about himself. Number 8 is very, very important. Examine the teen's family and religious background and impact these have on him. Okay? You know, the family, and especially working with teenagers but also young children, the family unit is very, very important. You know, you've heard messages preached about the importance of the family. Well, it's very, very important. You can't get very far when you work with teens and young children if you don't get any support from the family, from parents especially. Okay? And quite often in the mental health field, a lot of families would do that. They would say, oh, you have the problem, my son or daughter has a problem, you fix him, you fix her. And I would counter quite often, no, this is going to be a family issue, so I want to see all of you. And if they say, no, we don't have time, see, that gives me information as to their level of commitment. Okay? And so in that case, you just do your best to work with the team to deal with the situations that they face, make the most out of it. Number 9, don't overlook the influence of the group. Group acceptance is important at this time in a teenager's life. You know, one of the things is, I want to put in a plug for Gary and what he does, okay? When you look at group acceptance and forming skills and relationships, to me, there's no better group than another group of teens within a church. Okay? Youth groups, I think Carol and I can both attest the youth groups the youth group that we were in, as we were growing up, played a significant role in our development, the way we thought. And the pandemic has really thrown things off, but you can work around it. If you, let's say, I know some of you have kids from other homes getting together with your kids, and that's really, really important, because they need that support, they need that socialization, that ability to fellowship and be with other teens. If you can't do it, we can't do it in a formal way, say through youth group meetings or youth activities, then the next best thing is, as families, to say, hey, let's invite so-and-so over here, spend time with our son or daughter, okay? But the influence of the group is really, really crucial. That's why in secular situations, teens form relationships with others who are involved in undesirable, inappropriate behaviors, because it's filling a need that they crave for. And they want to belong somewhere, they want acceptance, and many times they are being accepted by the wrong crowd. Number 10, allow for the fact that teenagers lack information and understanding. Don't assume that he or she knows what you know. Don't measure the amount of knowledge or experience that a teenager has by your own experience. Number 11 goes along with number 9. Encourage a teenager to participate in Christian activities, pointing out that they will develop as they participate. 12, view teenagers' interest in physical development and sex education as normally related to their adolescent growth. Deal with interests in matters related to sex. Okay? You might think that teens will not talk to you about it. Okay? And I can't count the number of, how many teens over the time that I worked at Pearl City, how many of them wanted to talk about relationships? They wanted to talk about sexual relationships. Okay, and so this is a time when you might feel, okay, I don't want to deal with this, makes you uncomfortable, and you show it by having wide eyes or whatever, then it's going to convey to them that, hey, this is a taboo subject, don't talk about it. But that's an area of interest for our teens, okay? And making good decisions, making biblical decisions in this area is a key. Help teens develop self-control. Self-control. Point out the power of the indwelling Holy Spirit. Okay? How do you develop self-control? How do you teach self-control? Well, many times you go over the same thing. You talk about behavior. Okay, this behavior leads to this benefit, has this consequence. Okay, and many times you have to repeat yourself. If you do this, what do you think is going to happen? Good and bad. If you do this, what's going to happen? And you find yourself repeating over and over again, because they just need that repetition before it begins to sink in. So that's one of the ways of you develop self-control. There's nothing magical about it. There's no magical formula. It's just having them think through. It doesn't do very much good, I believe, to tell them, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. Okay? You get them to think, because if they come to the conclusion that if I do this, this is what's going to happen, therefore I won't. They own it. They've come up with it on their own. It's more likely to stick than if you just told them what to do and not to do. Don't assume that there is a serious problem behind seemingly trivial circumstance, but neither should we overlook that possibility. I have an example here. A girl might be kissed by a boy, she thinks that's the end of the world. Okay. Hey, it's happened, even at the high school level. Okay? And what would be our tendency? Well, that's no big thing. But to that girl, that is a big thing. That's a major issue. And so that's where counseling can be really helpful. And your reaction to it, if you say, oh, don't worry about it, it's no big thing, that's not an appropriate response. Deal with it as if it is a major event in that person's life. But also realize, hey, to you it might not mean anything. As you talk more about it with that teen, it may not be that important, but you never know, it could be. Okay. And I use that example. For example, if you have a girl who's been sexually abused, okay, and she gets kissed by a boy, that is a major thing, okay? So if you know something about the background, there's been sexual abuse or inappropriate touching, and brings us a whole end of the world, I don't know what to do, this kid, he kissed me or whatever, don't downplay it and think that's not important. If you know in the history some things happen that could trigger a negative response, then you deal with it seriously. 15, be a source of balance and stability. Don't be overly indulgent or sympathetic, neither should you be too critical or severe. Be an example of balance and stability. Okay? And that's difficult for all people who are involved in counseling to be right in the middle. You're not condoning sin now, okay? But you're not overreacting yourself, and you're not being irrational yourself. You're just kind of looking at what's happening here from all the information that I've gathered. Where do I go from here? And you just take those steps that are needed. And again, it takes practice. It doesn't come overnight. It will take practice. Don't underestimate the potential of teens. Don't overlook one who isn't doing well. Many obstacles may prevent him from showing his true ability. And once he finds his niche, he will blossom. Be patient. Don't count on them making steady progress. They will fluctuate. They will make mistakes. Okay, how many of you, even after you were saved, never made a mistake in your life? Oh, none of us have, right? You're a Christian. The power of the Holy Spirit is working in you. You make some progress, and then you fall back into sin. And then you move on, you confess this and you move on, and then sooner or later you fall back again. Okay? But what we see in the Christian life is that growth, that maturity. Same with, if you're working with a teenager, whether he or she knows Christ or not, you're always making progress. And you tell them, I've told them, I don't expect you to be perfect, because none of us are perfect. You fall back, and then you move ahead. You fall back, you move ahead, but you never go back to where you were. Okay? And that's the philosophy of follow. And so how does that play out as you're working with them? I don't scold. I never scolded. If they went ahead and they fell back, I never scolded them. Okay? And I shared with you before, and some students have asked me, why aren't you scolding me? I said, well, it's not going to do any good, right? Do you feel if I scold you, it's going to do any good? No. Okay, and you've probably been scolded by your parents and other your teachers. And I used to be scolded growing up, so I don't like that. So I'm not going to do something that I didn't enjoy myself. Okay? But we learn from it. What did you learn from this fallback? What did you learn? I said, okay, let's put it behind us, and you move ahead. You apply the same skills the next time this comes up. They fall back. I said, okay, well, that shows me that you still have to work on that, and we just keep moving ahead. And so it's the attitude that you take of not condemning them and not criticizing them for keeping on the road once they're on the right track. Expect them to make progress and then fall back. Number 18 is a big one, and it's many times it's a difficult thing. Help teenagers build closer relationships with their parents. Adolescence often brings rifts between teens and their families. Work with teens on appreciating their parents more, or teaching them skills needed to live peaceably with them. Skills needed for living peaceably with parents are the same as those needed to get along well with anyone else. So what you're doing is, if you keep in mind what I'm trying to work with my son or daughter, or another family's son or daughter, what I'm trying to do is teach them life skills that will help them not only get along with their parents and others in their family immediately, and those in their social circle, but when they get out of school and go into the workforce, go to college. It's something that they're going to be learning, they can take with them for the rest of their lives. Okay? And number 19, we can put this in the very front, lead the team to Christ. This is the highest goal in counseling. Yeah, land down.
question about thought disorders.
Yeah.
Is it mainly biological, or can it be triggered by an external circumstance such as fear?
Yeah. Back in 1975, when we're looking at schizophrenia and other forms of psychosis, there was a big debate whether it's hereditary or environmental. And the conclusion back then was that it could be either one, or it could be both. Okay? And over the years to today, they still don't know the answer. Although there's been more evidence that shows that, let's say, like schizophrenia is hereditary, and they find that when they see a history of schizophrenia in the family and going back several generations, then a person has a more likely tendency to also have a schizophrenic episode down the road. Okay, but it's not a guaranteed thing. You know, some people, you know, when you have thought disorder, they could be because of depression. You know, they're tired, anxiety, they can't sleep, so they get tired. But what happens is that every person is different. Okay? A person may have a family background where there's no evidence of schizophrenia, any thought disturbance, and then because of the stress in their situation, it kind of like, for lack of a better, it puts them, you know, puts them over the edge. Okay? But it's not really certain as to what causes thought disorder. Okay? It could be a combination, but I think that it sounds like it's kind of swung to more of the genetic side, you know, the hereditary side. Yeah. By the way, if you have a thought disorder once in a while, okay, don't worry about it, okay? Now, if you've had a thought disorder every day and it's gone on for several months, and you can't go to work, or you can't communicate with others, then yeah, it's a serious thing. Okay. Same thing with depression. In fact, maybe Dan, I could have you and Josh, you can pass out the final handout. We'll get this started a little bit, and then we'll finish up. Next week, we'll be able to finish up our counseling class, so make it within 7 weeks. But as you'll see in your handout, depression is the same thing here. Okay. All of us get depressed, so to speak. But if depression goes on for more than 2 weeks and it interferes with one's ability to function and communicate, then you got to really seriously consider that it's more than just simply having the blues. So I'd like you to, I'm just going to cover the first couple paragraphs and take this home, because read it. If you have questions, send them to me, and then if you have questions next week as we move towards bringing this to a close, I can talk about this. But we're going to look at depression defined, signs and symptoms of depression, and you notice I have 15 listed. Then I have 8 listed for young people especially, to look at for depression. Then on page 2, we'll look at the risk factors for depression. Some people are more prone to be depressed given these factors. Then we're going to talk about red flag signs for suicide. The longer you live as a Christian, the likelihood you will meet someone who has said at one time in their life, maybe it'd be better if I just wasn't alive anymore. Okay, and maybe you've talked to someone like that. I just don't feel like living anymore. And especially in the times in which we live right now, there's a rise in that. People are depressed, and like I said, a quarter of young adults have contemplated suicide in the last few months. So these are the red flag signs for suicide, and you don't have to be a psychologist or psychiatrist to assess lethality, because many times people don't have that opportunity to go and see a psychologist or a psychologist, or they don't, teens will not go and see a counselor in school. And I've shared this, these are things, it's nothing new, I've shared this with high school students, juniors and seniors, because I've told them, you might be the only person who knows that your good friend is thinking about suicide. Your counselor, that person's counselor doesn't know because he or she doesn't want to share with the counselor. Parents don't know, nobody knows, but you know. And I would encourage them, this is what you need to do. Okay, you cannot ignore that. And because there have been times when people ignored it and the consequences were really, well, literally deadly. Okay. But depression, let's just define depression so you have an idea. People use the word depression, the term depression in many ways. How many of us have gotten up sometimes a day said, oh, I'm just depressed today, okay? I'm just depressed. And sometimes people feel sad, or we use, I'm feeling sad, I'm having the blues today. And they say that, okay, because I'm sad, I'm blue, I'm depressed. Okay, but being sad, being blue, doesn't mean that you have clinically a depressive disorder. People with the blues may have a short-term depressed mood, but generally if you're depressed or you're sad, you can still go about carrying out your daily functions. You will soon recover without any kind of intervention. Okay. Second paragraph, the type of depression that mental health professionals often see as major depressive disorder. Okay. And the major depressive disorder is what is referred to as a mood disorder, and it's the most severe and most disabling form of depression. Way back in the 70s when we had the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, depression fell in two categories: depressive neurosis, which a lot of people had, and then psychotic depression, which they started thinking about suicide. But you look at the manual today, it's more detailed. They don't talk about just depressive neurosis and psychotic depression, but they'll talk about major depressive disorders. So if you hear that floating around, someone says to you, I've been diagnosed by my doctor or psychiatrist having a major depressive disorder, it's something that's a little more serious. Okay, it probably lasts more than 2 weeks. Most people, it will linger for a long time. And here's the important thing: it affects a person's ability to carry out their work and their daily activities. And it keeps people from having satisfying personal relationships. In other words, they can't get out of bed in the morning to go to work. They can't get out of bed to get ready and go to school. And so or they go to work and they make all kinds of mistakes, or they have to leave early, or they're going and they're crying at their workstation all day long. So it's affecting their ability to carry out their work responsibilities. And also people don't want to be around them. They don't want to be around someone who's crying all the time or being really depressed and looking sad. So we think about depression and we always think, okay, a person who's depressed, he looks sad. He looks sad and he looks withdrawn. And that's certainly true of some people with depression. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at the other signs that may mean that depression is a major problem. Okay? And so I have this last paragraph in the top part, and we'll finish with this. Not every person who is depressed has all the major symptoms. People differ in the number of symptoms they have and how severe the symptoms are. But generally speaking, a person who is clinically depressed has 5 or more of the following symptoms nearly every day for at least 2 weeks. Okay. Again, a word of caution: as you read through this, please do not say, I have a major depressive disorder. Okay. Because if you say I have a major depressive disorder, I say, well, tell me about your daily activities. Are you still able to get out of bed? If you have a job, are you still able to go to work? Are you able to carry out your daily responsibilities? How about your relationships? And if you answer, yeah, I'm able to do that, then my conclusion would be you probably don't have major depressive disorder, because it has to interfere with your functioning as well as your personal relationships. Okay? You may say, well, I've been feeling blue for 2 years, okay? But if you're still able to carry out your major functions, that's a positive sign. Okay? But in all cases, as we'll see, whether a person says, I don't know if I have major depressants or I'm in a major depression, we'll always get to this, the red flag signs for suicide. Okay? One thing to keep in mind, if a person says they're depressed, and we'll talk about this more, I always ask them, have you ever thought about ending your life? Have you ever thought about killing yourself? Okay? And I'll explain why that's important to ask. Okay? Because depending on the response, it kicks into gear another set of actions that need to be taken. Okay? Or you can say, okay, we just monitor, but depending on the response, it could mean taking more drastic steps. And as you'll see at the end when you look at this, under next steps to take under page 4, and by the way, I put all these phone numbers on page 4. Okay, you've probably been hearing about this new Hawaii Cares number for suicide. When I was working at the school, whenever a student was suicidal, we would call the 24-hour crisis line, the 832-3100 number. And someone would come out, assess. Sometimes they would take the student to Queens, the psychiatric unit, or some other places, or they would just say, hey, call the parents can watch them. So I don't know if the Hawaii Cares number, the one under A on page 4, has replaced that, but they used to be tied together, so that 832 number might still be in effect, and that's a good one to call if there was a student involved. And the other two are nationwide, so if you know someone on the mainland who is going through a difficult time, give them these numbers, these nationwide numbers, 1-800-SUICIDE and 1-800-273-TALK. Okay? So with that, we'll wrap things up for tonight. Any last questions that you have? So bring your depression and suicide handout for next week, and then we'll cover this and deal with any final questions, and then we'll just wrap things up in our course. Okay? All right, let's close with a word of prayer tonight. Thank you, Father, for our time together, and just thank you so much for the information which has been shared and discussed. And Lord, we ask again that you will just use the materials that we have in front of us to more effectively minister to and help those around us who are in need. And we know, Lord, that these are very, very difficult times. And we have the answers in Christ Jesus, in the Word of God. And may we use the skills that we have learned, and as we practice them, also apply the truths of God's Word to help those who are facing a lot of uncertainty and chaos in their lives, and who need to be guided and exposed to the truth. Thank you so much for our time together. Just protect us as we make our way home tonight. In Jesus' name we pray.